Hi, Michelle Glass here. Welcome back to our second episode of Chapter 23, Lecture 23. We are still, of course, talking about the respiratory system, and our job for this video is to start talking about external respiration. It'll take us a few videos to cover this topic. External respiration is defined by our text as gas exchange between the interstitial fluid and the atmosphere. So that's talking about getting air into the body, getting those gases to the bloodstream, getting those gases from the bloodstream to your interstitial fluids, and then back in that direction. External respiration has three important parts. So primarily the focus for this video will be on pulmonary ventilation, which I like to just talk about as breathing. So there's basically getting that air into the body or getting that air out of the body. So how does that happen? Then we'll look at gas diffusion. So that's the movement of those gases from those alveoli sacs to the blood and out to the tissues. And then we'll look at how oxygen and carbon dioxide gases are transported through the bloodstream. So we have three major pieces to talk about. Pulmonary ventilation, this word is talking about, of course, providing air to the lungs. So this is the actual breathing that's pulling air into the body or pushing air out of the body. Now, the movement of air is based on gas laws. And the gas law that is really used to describe pulmonary ventilation is Boyle's law. And Boyle's law says there's an inverse relationship between volume and pressure. Inverse relationship just means opposite. So if the volume is low, the pressure is high. Or you can say the volume is high, the pressure is low. So they're just opposites of each other. So let's take a look here. If you have a big space, those gas molecules have plenty of room to move around. There's lots of space in between them. They're not having to touch or collide very much. So here you have a very large volume and a very small amount of pressure with these gas molecules. If we start closing them up and squeezing the same amount of gas molecules into a tighter and tighter space, we're increasing our pressure. When we have decreased the volume, we've increased the pressure because those gas molecules are now bumping into each other. They're bumping into the sides of the container. They don't have as much room to roam. And so this is Boyle's law. The other thing for us to know is that gas molecules are going to move from high pressure to low pressure. So we see that the body manipulates this. We are going to be changing the size of our lungs. And by doing that, we're going to be changing the pressure in our lungs. And by doing that, then we're going to be pulling or pushing air in and out of the body. Let's take a minute and look at our lung anatomy. So you should be talking about this as part of your lab work, or you will be very soon if you haven't. Now we have a pleural cavity that's housing our lung. And so we know that we're going to have a visceral pleura, which is going to be up against the wall of the lung. So viscera, remember, is talking about our guts. So visceral pleural is talking about the wall of the lung. And then we have the parietal pleura, which is closest to the body wall. The body wall being skeletal muscle and bone of the thoracic cage. Notice that connecting the two layers together, the visceral and parietal pleura together, is fluid. And that fluid is called the pleural fluid. So as long as you have fluid in this pleural cavity, then you have a connection between the visceral pleura, the parietal pleura, and the skeletal muscle in the thoracic cage. And so what we can see is movement of the skeletal muscle. Increasing the size of our thoracic cage will also increase our lung capacity, or vice versa. Okay, so essentially what we're going to see happening is as our lungs expand and get larger, this is going to give us our inhalation of breath, which we can also call our inspiration. The idea here being that your muse has breathed life into the creative process and inspired you. Okay, or compressing the lungs, making them smaller, is going to push air out for the exhale. So we can also call that expiration, which is pretty easy to connect that one with exhale. So let's do a little activity, hands-on with your own body. So go ahead and put your right hand on your chest and then your left hand on your abdominal cavity below your diaphragm. And I just want you to take breaths in through your nose. So do a inhale through your nose and hold it. Feel how your chest cavity has risen, how your abdominal cavity has changed, pulling up. And then do an exhale out your nose and feel how your rib cage is pulled down and how it's pulled down into how you have changes in your abdominal cavity. Expansion of the lungs is happening with your inhale, and compression of your thoracic cage is happening with your exhale. Okay, so keep that in mind as we keep going through. All right, so at rest, you're going to see no movement of air in or out of the lungs. At your inspiration, this is your inhale, you're going to expand your rib cage. When you physically expand the rib cage, you're going to be increasing your lung volume. When you do that, that's going to basically like pull air into the lungs because you have increased the volume in your lungs, reduce the pressure in your lungs compared to the atmosphere, and so that's going to suck air into the body. When we are doing our exhale, we're going to see that our diaphragm is compressing on our rib cage. We are pushing our air out because we are reducing the volume of our lungs. When we reduce the volume of our lungs, we increase the pressure, which is going to push air out. Okay, so another way of saying this is in the inspiration, our pulmonary pressure is less than atmospheric pressure, so the air is going to go from the atmosphere into the lungs. Or during exhalation, our pulmonary pressure is greater than our atmospheric pressure, and so the air will leave the lungs and go out to the atmosphere. In each case, we're seeing Boyle's law play a role. So here in inspiration or inhale, again, by expanding the rib cage, you're expanding the lungs. That's increasing the volume and decreasing the pressure so that the pulmonary pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure. This means that air is going to go from high to low pressure. So it's going to go from atmosphere to the pulmonary to the lungs. Or when we do our exhale, we're going to compress our rib cage. We are going to make our lungs smaller, so decrease the volume. That's going to increase the pressure. So we can talk about that as the pulmonary pressure is greater than the atmospheric pressure. Pressure is going to, or gas is going to move from high to low pressure. So it's going to leave the lungs and go out into the atmosphere. So clearly it's skeletal muscle controlling the thoracic cage and abdominal muscles that will be responsible for our inhales and our exhalations. Now we have what we can call inspiratory muscles and expiratory muscles. Remember, inspiration is inhale and expiration is exhale. We have what's described as primary inspiratory and expiratory, or our basic inspiratory and expiratory muscles. These are the muscles that are going to be responsible for quiet breathing at rest. So our external intercostal muscles are going to elevate the rib cage, and that's going to help to lift the lungs. And our diaphragm is contracting down into the abdominal cavity, making that thoracic cage or that thoracic cavity larger, and that's going to basically pull down on the lungs. So you're pulling down and lifting out, down and out. And so we're increasing the volume of our lungs. We're decreasing the pressure in our lungs. And so air is going to be pulled into the lungs. On the other side, you have no primary expiratory muscles. This is a passive process. Instead, what we see happening is the external intercostal and the diaphragm relax. When they relax, the volume goes down. If our volume decreases, then our pressure increases. And so then that's going to push air out of the lungs. So primary quiet breathing is a passive process. We just let those muscles relax. So remember again, these are the muscles involved in quiet breathing. We can call it eupnea. That's fancy, isn't it? Okay. Now we have what's called accessory or secondary inspiratory and expiratory muscles. These are going to be muscles involved in the what we can call the forced inhale and the forced exhale. So let's go back to this view here. You're at rest. You're breathing without a lot of thought, although we're talking about it, so you're thinking about it more, right? So just your quiet, regular breathing. When we're talking about accessory and secondary muscles, we're talking about where we're doing much more than those quiet inhales and quiet exhales. So now we need to recruit more muscles, but the principles are the same. In the case of our accessory or secondary inspiratory muscles, we're going to be recruiting for sternocleidomastoid, scalenes, pectoralis minor, and serratus anterior. Now, you studied all of these in AP1 except for scalenes. So I'm listing them here because they are an accessory secondary inspiratory muscle, but I'm not going to really ask any questions on it because that's a muscle we haven't learned. So know for sure sternocleidomastoid, pectoralis minor, serratus anterior are all elevating the thoracic cage. If we are elevating the thoracic cage, we are making the volume bigger, the pressure smaller, and so air is getting pulled in. And our forced exhale, we are going to basically pull down on that thoracic cage and really compress that thoracic cage. So we're going to see involvement of internal intercostal muscles, transverse thoracis, external oblique, rectus abdominis, and internal oblique. So we have several here that are part of our abdominopelvic cavity that are going to play a role. Now again, here we have 5 muscles, 4 of which we already know from A&P1. We haven't studied transversus thoracis, so while it's listed here because it is one of our accessory expiratory muscles, I won't be asking any questions on that one. So we need to know for sure internal intercostals are going to depress the thoracic cage, external oblique depressing the thoracic cage. Well, that's not right. Really, rectus abdominis and internal intercostals are depressing the thoracic cage. The external and internal obliques are compressing those abdominal organs, so kind of flattening them and pushing them up into the thoracic cavity, making the lung volume less, and so the pressure is higher, and so air is being pushed out. Okay, so this is our forced breathing, hyperpnea. Okay, so we do need to know the listing of both primary and secondary inspiratory and expiratory muscles. And also the concept of how Boyle's law is used to describe our inhalations and exhalations of breath. Okay, so that is it for now.